It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. From Fantha Tracks TV, this is Good Morning Tatooine!
Good morning, Tatooine. Welcome to the live stream. It's Thursday evening, which means one thing. It's time for the Andor review of this week's Disney Plus episode. We're at episode 7, and it was called The Announcement. And to discuss that episode from FanthaTracks.com, Mr. Mark Newbold. Oh, there we go.
Hey, my big mouth. How you doing?
Not too bad, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well, very well. You've got me on the mobile tonight because my Wi-Fi provider has decided to do works, which means my Wi-Fi is rubbish. Excellent. So there you go.
That's what we like to hear.
I need Matt as my photographer, you see. He's the guy with a steady hand, so I can only apologise for the bad camera work.
That's all right. We'll keep the focus on the images from the show tonight, maybe, and that'll save us. So let's kick it off. Andor, episode 7. What was your thoughts?
Well, I mean, after the Eye last week, which was pretty incendiary, lots going on, lots of box ticking for people who like a bit of action in their Star Wars. I think this one, for me anyway, was probably the most interesting episode we've had so far. It really got into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. I think Mothma really came into her own in this episode. The focus, to me, felt like it was squarely on her and her situation. And also the ISB, that's stepping up. You know, anybody that played West End Games role play back in the 90s knows how dangerous those guys can be. And they're really starting to, it's really starting to come across in the show. Seeing, is it General Yularen at this point? I think he becomes Admiral eventually. But, seeing him give that speech was fascinating. Sander did the guide that went on Fantha Today, which delved into a lot of the details from the episode. But, yeah, I was really impressed with this. People who like their politics in Star Wars would have been sort of hop, skipping and jumping out of this one.
Yeah, totally. We'll start off the episode with I thought initially, we've got a young Thrawn, but sadly it wasn't. It was Cyril with the lovely blue light shining on his face there. Looking very sad. The guy's he's had a rough month. He's been through 2 prime ministers already. And he's back living at home with his mother, and he's not having a happy time at all, is he?
He's not. In the Star Wars galaxy, your chancellor and your prime minister and your president and everything else is all one person that may tend to stay in place for quite a long time. So the uncertainty must be killing everyone. But yeah, he's in a rough spot. I actually think you might have mentioned it in one of our chat threads today, where you were saying you like the slow burn for Cyril.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. It's interesting because you kind of know that even though he's gunning for Cassian, excuse me, you're kind of rooting for him in a way, like you're almost rooting for Dedra Meero in a weird way, even though they're the inverted commas bad guys. Everybody in this show's grey anyway. So yeah, the Cyril storyline was fascinating once again over the breakfast table.
Yeah, he's back in the Cocoa Pops and blue milk. I wondered for anyone watching this live if you've got thoughts on Cyril, let us know, because he's kind of become something of a controversial character because he represents better than anything the slow burn of the show and the character building of the show. Everyone kind of assumes he's going to be on the Imperial side against Cassian. My gut feeling says he's going to end up a rebel. I just feel there's going to be that twist in his storyline. There's going to be something break, and there's something deep and interesting about the character.
I wouldn't argue with that. That's a good point, actually. I think one of the things I like about the show, and a lot of people probably wouldn't connect with this because it's not the flash crash bang wallop that you might have expected from Star Wars, is the drudgery. I would imagine, like on Earth, 95% of people are just bobbling along their daily lives, and it's the same in the Star Wars galaxy. And he's a guy who thinks he's got a destiny, and probably has got a destiny, but he's not really getting any of the support. He's not getting noticed. It's a tough climb for him. So, yeah, I wouldn't disagree with what you say that in 5 episodes' time it turns out that he's one of the tacticians on Yavin plotting the Death Star run or something. That would not surprise me one little bit.
Yeah, something's going to happen, I think.
Yeah.
So we get the usual kind of little story at home of him and his mother's not happy with him. He's got a job interview lined up thanks to Uncle Harlow, the mysterious Uncle Harlow. Mother's not impressed because he's got a high collar on. He's been getting some tailoring work done again. The guy obviously knows a good tailor because that's his second uniform he's had done up. But talking to people in nice uniforms, we mentioned him already. Yularen, the sort of head of the Imperial Security Bureau, he's given them a bit of a doing because of the problems in Aldhani. Everybody's going to be raising taxes by 5 times in order to punish any sector that has any kind of rebel allegiance or allowing rebels to operate within them, and specifically targeting festivals and local ceremonies. So this is the real start of the Imperial crackdown across the galaxy.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the most fascinating sequences in the whole thing because, it goes right back to Phantom Menace, taxation of trade routes and all that sort of, that element, that part of it is been in there for a long time. And to see it enacted so quickly, really, after what's happened, it's not an empire that's sort of sitting on its heels and doing nothing. It's being proactive in this sense. The way that they're doing it is probably all completely wrong. Ramiro says that herself. Excuse me. That this is kind of playing into their, meaning the rebellions, into their hands, because as she refers to it, it's an announcement. That line later on. But with Yularen coming in again, a character we know well from Clone Wars and Rebels, and now here he is, and we finally see him in A New Hope. I thought that whole sequence was fascinating because they've not hung around. They've got stuck straight in to try and quash this as quickly as they can. And also the mention of the Emperor as well, which I was quite delighted to hear.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting to get the sort of shout-outs to the Emperor a little bit and kind of want him to appear. More so than perhaps in Obi-Wan and other places where he may have appeared.
I hope so. I just hope, though, just as a little point, that if they do show the Emperor, that he looks like the way he did in Jedi and not the way he did in Rise of Skywalker, because in Kenobi, it was just old Ian McDiarmid it just didn't look right to me. Yeah. Now's the time maybe to do a CG Emperor, I don't know, or maybe somebody else to be in the makeup, but I don't know. But it didn't quite work for me.
Yeah. We flipped over to Luthen Rail, who's, I guess, listening into the problems at Aldhani. Yeah,
I mean, he's put a lot on the line, and I know he's sort of skipping a little bit through the episode, but it seems fairly, to me anyway, fairly clear that on the sort of scale of rebels, there is a sliding scale of rebels where at one end you'd probably put somebody like Saw Gerrera, who's quite militant and obviously that partisan element, right through to somebody who's trying to make subtle political change, raising money, which is where Mon Mothma is at this point. and we know that she moves along that scale as the years go by. The first time we ever meet her is in Jedi, and she's all in, boots and all. At this point, she's still playing it very carefully, and people like Luthen are essentially tipping her hand, and irrespective of the fact that, like she said a couple of weeks ago, I've got the most to lose. I've got so much on the line. So it was very interesting to see Luthen's reactions to things this week.
We also got the reason as to why Luthen's a rebel and against the government. Subtly, very subtly put here. Lack of parking in front of shops.
It's a killer, isn't it? You need a blue badge like we've got. They're so useful.
Guy's trying to make a living, and all he's got is one parking space at the front of his shop. It's just terrible. Where do the steps go?
Well, I don't. There's a question. Maybe there needs to be a source book to explain where the steps go on Coruscant.
Yeah, there we go. It's very, very strange, very strange. But he kind of meets up with Mon Mothma. They play their little game of pretending they're there to do business, and get the classic smile on the face of Luthien there. He's having so much fun selling his wares to Mon Mothma, whilst they exchange digs at each other about how they're going about rebelling. They've both got different takes in it, and we kind of learn a little bit more about Mon Mothma's role in all this. She's there to bring some money into the rebellion. She's got a lot of money behind the family, apparently, but she's struggling to tap into it. Luthien, on his part, seems to become frustrated by that, and has started to gather together his own money, which is how the whole Aldani kind of plot has unravelled, I guess. Yeah,
it was very reminiscent in a way, not to the same degree, because that was far more proactive and action-packed, but the moment when they have the big meeting in Rogue One, and sort of Jyn and Cassian are like, Cassian's there with all the guys like, come on, we're going to Scarif, we're doing this. It's now or never, and they go and do it. And this is one of those tipping points where Luthen, like I said, has kind of, it's out of Mothma's hands. She's kind of got to roll with it. But like you just said, that little exchange between the two of them, still keeping the facade. She still doesn't trust the taxi driver. I'm not entirely sure I'm fully trusting Claire, who's Luthen's assistant. There's little interchanges and the way they're presenting things, very very cleverly done. Oh, just one aside as well. I have to assume that unlike the real world of today, here on Earth, they don't have, or there's some sort of countermeasure to listening devices, because you'd imagine it'd be very easy if they're spying on people to bug them. So I can only assume there's some sort of countermeasure device that makes bugging people just not work, because otherwise they'd be listening in on everything.
Yeah, because we kind of learnt that Cloris, the taxi driver, he's basically a plant for the Imperial Security Bureau. They're already keeping an eye on Mon Mothma. And the whole plot is basically that she's deliberately being an irritant, but only to an acceptable level, I would describe it as. And that's really her cover for the depths that she really is operating to. So she's kind of being one of these irritant politicians. We know a lot of them, and but really the scale of what she's up to isn't really known to the Imperials. And you kind of mentioned on the flip side of that, Luthien's assistant, Clea. Is it Clea? We're going with
I think it's Clea.
Clea Markey. I find it interesting that she was kind of listening into the conversation. I wasn't entirely clear as to whether she should have been doing that. And I wondered is there some kind of tension between her and Luthien? And I kind of say that because later on in the episode, and she meets up with Val, and Val was kind of expecting to meet Luthien, and you wonder did Luthien even know she was meeting up with Val? Is she kind of playing a game herself here?
Yeah, I think there's, because we're not really unified fully as a rebellion yet, it's still quite splintered. Me and Mark have been talking about this on reaction chats, making tracks. Rebels is happening pretty much at the same time as this, give or take. So there's factions around the galaxy. Obviously, we know Saw Gerrera comes into it fairly soon, with his much more, or we assume much more militant. Maybe it becomes much more militant by the time of Rogue One. Maybe it's not quite so full on at this point, but I would assume it is. Could be wrong. But yeah, it's wheels within wheels, isn't it? That's how it feels. You know, her going off and having that meeting with Vel, and you know, yeah, I agree. I wonder whether or not Luthen even knows about that. That was an interesting sequence as well.
Yep. There was kind of like something subtle going on there. I wasn't quite grasping what they were kind of heading towards.
Yeah.
On the opposite side of Coruscant, my favourite, Cyril, he's up for joining the Imperial Standards Commission. Would that be the right way to describe them? Effectively, the European Union's version of the Bendy Bananas club. They ensure that things like weights and measures and all that kind of malarkey is getting operated correctly, and that's, you know, you've democratically elected a nice guy like the Emperor, like I say every episode, and he cares about these things, make sure that things are done correctly, and he's got a whole squad of people going there, and it just so happens to be a job opening for Cyril, kindly introduced to the potential of this industry by Uncle Harlow, and the guy interviewing him with the wonderful name of Flob. Which
that is a great name.
It is a great name. That's one that's going to go down in Star Wars lore, surely. Flob. The Cyril just not a happy guy. He's not getting the most exciting role in the galaxy. And on the opposite side of that, we've got Luthen's assistant there, starting to get involved in the underground shenanigans of this rebellion in a more active kind of role. She travels across the city. There seems to be little markers to guide people to certain locations marked around the city in chalk on the floor.
Yeah, a bit like Mandalorian, wasn't it, when Mando was following the signals in season 2, in Book of Boba Fett, when he met the armourer on that station. It was a similar thing, wasn't it? Yeah.
So I was interested to see her take a more prominent role in the storyline, I thought.
Yeah, it took me, you know, I had to watch it twice to sort of cotton on that it was the same person. I didn't, at first I thought, who's this?
Yeah,
and then I was like,
that was my reaction as well. I was kind of thinking, who is this, a new character?
Yeah. And then penny dropped. It was like, oh, hang on, it's Luthen's aide, assistant, partner, whatever. That the facade. Well, that's another thing to consider. The facade of her being his assistant in the shop doesn't mean she's his assistant for real. She could be the boss, and Luthen could be lower down the chain. We just don't know yet. But yeah, that did. Excuse me. That did seem, as we said. I wonder who knows what's going on. Whether it's like a pyramid system where people don't report down; they only report up. Yep. So, you know, who knows what's going on. But certainly now Vel is on Coruscant. You know, that's going to make life very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Daedra, she's still obsessed with what's been going on Ferrex, and she enlists a young wannabe security bureau guy who doesn't dress very smartly. He's a bit slobby. Attendant Felzonis, to do some research into where stolen Imperial goods are ending up, what sectors they're going to, and connections to rebel activity. She's kind of onto this whole idea that this isn't one-off things being stolen. There's some kind of coordinated nature to the whole thing.
Yeah, and after the speech that Yularen gave, which you could certainly interpret the way she interprets it, and of course we'll come back to that later, because she's so determined, so certain and sure that there is a pattern, now she's got the means to prove that there's a pattern. That whole scene was great anyway, because, you know, it's her being proactive, it's her hunting it down. And like I said earlier, she's ISB. She's not a, waggle the air quotes, good guy. But you kind of want to see her proven right, because the people around her are just so up themselves and so can't see beyond the end of the nose to a large degree. For her to figure this out, of course, it's going to further the story. We know where we're headed. We're headed towards, you know, Yavin and the Death Star. Ultimately, that's where this whole thing's headed. That's, by way of Rogue One, if you like. But yeah, for the Empire to be smartened up to the threat of the rebellion needs people like Dedra Meero to figure these things out.
Yeah, yeah. We've talked about Aldhani. We flipped back to Aldhani, which I kind of thought wasn't necessary in the episode. It felt a little bit, I don't know.
Dropped in, parachuted in.
Yeah, and I guess the whole idea was to show her kind of escaping on a speeder, but she didn't seem to be under any kind of real pressure.
No.
And yeah, it kind of just felt odd. I know that they kind of showed the Star Destroyer arriving on the planet like we saw in the sort of trailers, but and sitting there watching that arrive. But this, again, there didn't seem any kind of pressure on it. I know there was kind of talk from the various Imperials around the story about the number of people in Aldhani being arrested and so on, but we didn't see any of that, which I thought might have made more sense to have her. Is she escaping again? And I guess it was just to emphasise the fact that she survived. She's going to come back out in the storyline at some point down the line, I guess. But I kind of felt we'd already got that at the end of last episode when she kind of walked away still dressed as the Imperial.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was just to reinforce that. I love the speeder. Looked like it was made out of a couple of folding chairs, so I love the speeder. But and also I think just to indicate that the Emperor, or the Empire rather, are cracking down fast, and so certain planets, you see them. We've seen them on Ferrix. We know now they're on Aldhani. They're pushing out there, and you're actually seeing it happen. Which I kind of like. I can't begrudge them that, because, and I think Cinta will come into it at some juncture later anyway. But one of the things I didn't like about, for example, the sequel trilogy was they never really showed you how the First Order did what we knew they'd done by taking the galaxy. Here we are actually seeing the Empire do it, and you're seeing it almost planet by planet, or relevant planet by relevant planet. So sort of kudos to them for that. But I do agree, it did feel a little bit sort of slotted in as a sort of, it's like me putting a sting in a podcast episode to go from interview to interview sort of thing. It just moved you on to the next bit. But I think there might be a payoff to that. I think we'll see Cinta again.
Yeah. I wondered if maybe it was introduced to bring us sort of full circle back to the relationship between Cinta and Val, because we were reintroduced to her all smartly dressed up like a nice Coruscant citizen would be. She met with Cleela, and they kind of unraveled this whole kind of storyline of what's been going on and the connections between Luthien and the group on Aldhani, and what they thought of the other rebels really, and who was expendable and who wasn't. And effectively Val's now being assigned the role of hunting down Cassian and eliminating him as a problem.
Yeah, that's really the big bone of contention as to what Luthen knows of this, because Luthen clearly made it clear that he wasn't on Ferrix for the Starpath unit. He was there for Cassian, and you'd imagine that he wouldn't risk everything he risked and give him that kyber crystal and offer him the crazy money that he did just for one mission. That he's somebody that can use ongoing, if you like. So that makes me wonder whether or not Claire and Luthen are completely on the same page, because she makes it pretty clear that he's a loose end that needs tying up. Well, has that come from Luthen, or has that come from her, or her superiors, or whoever's making the decisions? I have no doubt the way this show's going that will be explained, and it won't be a loose end, because it does feel like a show that's going to tie off all these questions in a satisfying way.
Yeah, and talking about tying off kind of questions, we headed back to Ferrix. Cassian's gone back there. His idea was to get Marva and escape. Now he's rich, in effect, with his share of the cash, and he meets up with Marva. They have a nice kind of little reunion kind of chat. Tells her that they're going to be leaving in the morning, and it all seems happy and rosy. Everybody seems delighted to see him, and he learns a little bit about what happened with Tim and Bix, and Tim betraying him. So that kind of angers him as well a little bit there, and probably encourages him because later in the episode he goes to visit Bix as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that the whole Ferric sequence was fascinating to me. I like the shades of grey, of which there is many in this show. Not 50 Shades, just various shades. Because Tim, for example, I know you understand that Cassian would feel the way he feels about Tim, but from Tim's point of view, Cassian's an ex-boyfriend. He's nothing but trouble. He's going to get Bix into trouble. He owes Cassian nothing, and vice versa. So why wouldn't Tim, look out for his own and get Cassian out of the way? So I don't personally see that as a specific betrayal, but understandably Cassian would. But then, like you say, the whole sequence with his mom was brilliant. I could watch Fiona Shaw all day. I think she's awesome. So anything she's in, this, Killing Eve, anything she's in, I'm watching it. So she elevates this show even more than it is for me, and she's brilliant. So that whole sequence was sad and heartbreaking and understandable from both points of view. Just brilliant performances. And as you mentioned, going to see Bix, we know more about their relationship now. It's kind of sketched out to even more degree, more detail rather. And there's a sorrow there as well. It's just everything about the Ferric sequences was just really well played.
Yeah. We jump back over to Coruscant, the party that we've been promised for a few episodes now, in full swing. Not the most exciting party, it had to be said. Pretty dull affair. But we kind of got introduced to Tay Kolma, which was Chandrilla, male banker, and he's been a lifelong friend to Mon Mothma, and Mon Mothma's kind of got a little secret that she wants to speak to him about, and they kind of play a little game here, where they talk a little bit about their politics and how their politics may not suit the other, and there's a little bit of gamesmanship going on around the party, and we kind of see Mon Mothma's family and how she's kind of sort of removed from them, and she doesn't really interact with them that much at the party, and her whole focus is with Tay and trying to get the moment to speak with him. And I kind of liked, I think his name was Ben Miles, was the actor. I'm not familiar with him, but I kind of liked his facial expressions throughout it. I thought he played really well in the way that he kind of played the scene.
Yeah, and the way that she was speaking almost in code, if you were watching them from across the room, you'd never guess they were having the conversation they were having. And obviously it's a treasonous conversation, so they've got to be very, very careful, potentially. It makes you wonder who taught who when Luthen and Mon Mothma are speaking to each other. Was it her idea for the facades, or was it his? But yeah, the whole tone of the conversation, the flip in the middle where he's like, I don't think we should go down this avenue because I don't think you'll agree with my politics. And she's trying not to smirk by saying, well, you might be surprised. That whole play was just brilliantly done. And also another thing we mentioned on reaction chats, Mark brought it up, Mulcaster brought it up about saying how he believed that it was Mon Mothma that had the fortune, the money, the finances, not Perrin. And we weren't sure. There was nothing to definitely or definitively sort of point to that until this week when she says, my family fortune, I can't get to it, but you can help me out. Because, as you just said, he's a banker in the monetary sense. So just the whole tone of that conversation and where it went, really, again, a keystone episode. It's really teeing up extra stuff, probably not just for the rest of the season, but for the rest of the show for season 2 as well.
And I think if it was, if there was any doubt over Mon Mothma's feelings towards her husband, she pretty much said it straight, that the rest of the family is not there to be trusted.
Yeah, you're right. She just says it. Can't trust him, not trustworthy. He is a bit of a fop. He is a bit of a flake. He's a moth to the flame, isn't he? And he clearly doesn't put any or give any credit to the work that she's doing, and he doesn't know what she's doing above and beyond being a senator for their home planet. He's just there for for parties like this. You can imagine he's probably spent half his life on Canto Bight in the casinos.
He's one of those social climbers, would be the way to describe him, I think.
That's it. Yeah, exactly that.
And after that kind of scene, which kind of ends with an understanding between the two of them, without anything being said, we head back to Ferrex and Bix, who's walked into a wall, apparently. Cassian has gone to see her. They have quite a tense conversation with things. They're not friendly anymore. And it kind of felt almost like a final conversation. I wondered if that's her role in the series, maybe at an end. He kind of paid off his debts to his friends. He left the money with him, which kind of I thought paid quite well to his character. It kind of changed maybe from the first few episodes where he instead of sort of screwing over his friends, he was kind of trying to settle up old debts for the money that he's made. He was trying to put things right, but I don't think she was entertaining him too much.
No. I think with Cassian, he's always wanted to be in the position where he could square things off, and was always chasing the next deal, the next thing, the next money making scheme that could do it, and never quite came about. So now he's in a position to do it. You're right. I like the fact that he did, but yeah, there was a sort of a finality to this. Although saying that, I would be surprised if we didn't see Bix again, because she had the contact with with the buyer, with Luthen. So there is a connection there. We don't really know what Luthen makes of her yet, because we've not seen, other than their brief interaction when he came to Ferrex. We've not seen much more than that. So he obviously rates her to a degree. So I'd like to think we'll see her again. Maybe not within the same circles as Cassian, though, because again, on reaction chats, we talk, we hypothesize to our heart's content on that show. And one of the things we said was, we know the goal, we know the big strokes of the storyline of where this is all headed, but you can look at that storyline from different points of view. And just because Cassian and Bix may not interact ever again, it doesn't mean you won't see Bix doing stuff for the rebellion or stuff for the cause. So I'd like to think we'll see her, because she's such a watchable actress, and the character's fascinating.
Yeah. The one takeaway from that scene was Cassian left her with the message to send back to Luthien, as to basically leave me alone and I'm going to leave you alone kind of message. And Cassian kind of departs and he heads back through centre of Ferrex, and he encounters some troopers on the way, and it kind of leads to like a flashback of his adoptive father, Clem, and trying to prevent something of an uprising when there was kind of some I'm going to call them kids, I guess, throwing stones at the Imperials, and it kind of ends up with the Imperials, who are actually clone troopers.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, which I kind of liked, turning their guns on Clem. He ends up getting arrested and hung, and young Cassian has to watch that, and it kind of connects him back to sort of modern day and his feelings towards the Imperials, and it gives you a little bit of a nice backstory to him. And
that was a tough scene, really, because Clem's not around. He's not with Marva anymore, unless they had a Han and Leia separation, which didn't ever seem likely. So to explain his not being there was good from a story point of view, but terrible because of what happened to him, especially because he was actually trying to break something up, a misunderstanding with the Empire, which Cassian ends up in a similar situation later in the episode, not quite to the same degree, but not a million miles away. It's another layer of motivation for what Cassian's doing, and also it's the unpeeling of the onion, isn't it? He's got it within him. It's how long is it going to take to get to the point where he really is all in. And it's moments like that just you think that's another little step, that's another little nudge towards where he needs to be, the guy we see in Rogue One.
Yeah. And the flashback takes us back to modern day where Cassian's with Marva again. But at this point, Marva's kind of changed her attitude. She's not going to leave with Cassian. She's staying. She likes where she is. She'd rather be there and face up to the Imperials and live her life that way than sort of be on the run and hiding from them, I think.
Yeah.
And it wasn't an easy decision for her. You can see the anguish in her face. She also made an interesting comment to Cassian about to forget about his sister, which I'm still think is going to end up being Cinta.
Yeah, I don't quite know. I've got my own thoughts on that. Well, one, I think when they had the first conversation, she was fairly non-committal about what she was going to do. So I think she kind of made her mind up then.
Yeah.
But she also says, I've never loved anyone like I love you. So she's his mom. Essentially, for all intents and purposes, she's his mom. That's what he calls her ma. And
kidnapper.
yeah. But but there's that relationship there, very strong relationship there, and they've obviously been through a lot, losing Clem and various other things. And poor B2 just gets talked down all the time. I'd love to know what he was going to say. But in relation to the sister, and I'm probably completely wrong, and again, it's another thing I mentioned on reaction chats, is that I think as soon as, in fact, all of them to a degree, when they went inside that ship, they all got affected and infected by whatever was in there. So I wonder whether or not Cassian's on the clock anyway with his health, which would have made his decision at Scarif even easier than it would have been just as a heroic action. But the sister, yeah, there's something going. She's either, I don't know. There'll be some big twist. I can't really think what it will be, unless she's like the big bad or something. But to be warned off that way in what could very likely be their last ever conversation is quite telling, I think.
Yeah. We then head to Blackpool Pleasure Beach.
Yeah.
And I forget the name they're going to call the planet. Is it Nemos or something? It's going to be like
Nemos. I think it was Nemos, wasn't it? Yeah.
A holiday resort, and much like many of us that have had wild weekends in Blackpool, wakes up with a strange woman in his bed, called Windy, which you don't want in a partner. You don't want a windy partner.
Unless it's well ventilated, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously he's still reading The Secret Double Life. He goes by another fake name. And he's got cash that he's hiding from her when he's pretending to take a shower. And he goes out to buy some pizzos. Don't know what they are, but I'm going to guess they're some kind of snack food. And some drink, I think she was wanting. Which if I remember, because I think they mentioned the drink earlier in the season. I forget what they called it again. Was it rye something?
Right.
Yeah.
It's in Sander's guide. I do know Sander put it in the guide.
Yeah. Check fathertracks.com. It'll all be explained. And he goes out for a walk along the beachfront. And there's kind of like this weird element where there's suddenly some locals running along behind him with Imperials on chase. And without actually really doing anything, ends up confronted by a shore trooper and accused of being a rebel himself. And it was kind of like a weird scene. I kind of felt like it should have started with the guys that were on the run having done something. Even if it was something as simple as stealing something from a stand or something, just to give it some kind of context. It just felt odd.
Yeah, I mean, first off, it was interesting seeing Cleveland because we saw all those pictures last year or the year before when they were filming. So that was very interesting. But also the concept of literally people sitting by the beach in deck chairs, watching the waves and, quite real world sort of place. So I kind of dug that. But it probably would have helped if it had been something mundane because, they've clearly bumped up, the charges, the fines by ridiculous amounts, really clamping down across the galaxy, not endearing themselves to anybody. it was an interesting scene, and I also wonder because how much later they give you no indication how much later is it. At first I was like, is this a flashback or is this just what Cassian did next after he left Ferrix? Because the girl he's with, clearly there's a relationship going on there. They are where they are. So I'd love to know how far down the timeline this is from where we were when he left Ferrix.
Yeah, and obviously this is shot Cleveleys in the UK. It's just down the road from Blackpool. I went there earlier this year. Had an ice cream from the cafe that you can see in the background there, which was quite nice. Wasn't the warmest of days, but it was nice enough. I had a fish and chips.
Was that before we did Fan Fun Day?
Yeah, just before Star Wars Fan Fun Day in Blackburn.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we had a good time. I went there with Mr. Booker. And there was no KX droids, as are known. Any kind of droid that's bad must now have an X added to its name. So the KX droid rounding up the rebels, which was done in quite a comical kind of way, which I kind of liked. And poor Cassian gets pinned by one up against the wall, and he's arrested for anti-imperial sentiments and behaviours, which is just a terrible thing to be accused of. Bizarrely, whilst that's going on, there's a whole load of shore troopers in the background just standing about having a chat, not really caring that there's some action going on right behind them. But I kind of enjoyed that scene where there's always a little bit of comical element around we call it a KX droid now, or a K2SO KX droid. Yeah. And I thought it was quite a well done scene.
It's been good seeing those droids come into various medias. Obviously we know K2, and you see other versions of in Rogue One, of course, the Canary Wharf stuff. But and from memory, I think I wrote about it in Star Wars Encyclopedia. So there's various sort of various levels of these droids, but nevertheless, it's the first indication of. I'm sure everybody thought it was K2. It may end up being K2, but that's not relevant because there's thousands of them. We saw them in Mandalorian. We've seen them in other things. I like the way they're dotting them into different locations and different places. But that picture there, he's really not messing around. Poor Cassian's not having a good day.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Elliot said in the chat there that. Enjoying the world building, seeing things like people in deck chairs, it makes the planets feel more real. I kind of agree with that. I know there's some criticism from some quarters that people feel sometimes feels a little bit too like Earth, but I kind of think it kind of works. There has to be this level of comfort and normality on these planets that even when you're at war. And there's tensions and things going on, people try to live as much of a normal life as possible, and it kind of works for me seeing people going about their day to day.
Yeah, it is. It's that sort of. It's not, but it's kind of like that bulldog spirit. Like, we're not going to let these people grind us down. We're going to do what we do. If you on any planet with water, bodies of water, there's a coast, and if you live near it, you go to the beach or you go to the coast or whatever. And if that's what you've done as a family. Whatever planet in the galaxy you live on, other than Coruscant, because I can't imagine there's much water there, but anywhere else, then that's what you do. So it's, people in Star Wars go on holiday. It was interesting earlier in the episode where you see a news report on the television, and Sander made a great point of saying the only other time I personally remember seeing anything on a screen like that was Attack of the Clones at the Outlander, when they were betting on the races. But Holiday Special was the last time we saw a TV report. It's just normal day-to-day stuff that you would do, and I like that. I like the nitty-gritty of the galaxy like that, so I found it really interesting.
The only thing about the TV report, and I kind of find odd, was I always kind of felt that would be the kind of story that the Empire would suppress. If it's a negative story, that was my only downside. I know that we're using it as a plot device to inform people around the galaxy as to what was going on, but I kind of just felt a little bit like Putin's Russia. It's a kind of story that you're not going to necessarily have out, or you would have a different kind of twist on it, or yeah, that didn't really work for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. It'd be interesting to see how they play it in terms of, if I remember, and it may be legends rather than canon, but they kind of clamped down on pretty much all sort of news outlets, and it was just the Holonet, and
Yeah.
they were monitoring and sort of controlling the news and the propaganda and everything, because that's as much a part of the war as anything else. But there would still be like pirate radio in the 60s, and a boat off the coast sort of thing. There'll still be news outlets that do that, but the one that you saw didn't feel like one of those news outlets. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's a good point.
Of course, having said that, the Emperor is, of course, the democratically elected leader, and such acts against him are just a terrible crime, and people should know the terrible crimes that the poor guy's suffering.
Yeah, you reveal more than you realise, Cameron.
Yeah. And we kind of head towards the end of the episode. Cassian's up in court for his crimes against the Empire, the bad guy that he is. And he kind of smiles and laughs at the charges leveled against him because it is preposterous, would be the way to describe it. But things don't go well for him. And he ends up getting 6 years. Terrible. And I kind of agree with you there. This is what made, at this point, I kind of got confused. Is this a flashback scene where we've talked before about him being in jail and talked about him effectively having to work for the Imperials on the Mud Planet, whose name is completely forgotten.
Nimbin.
Yeah, and I kind of wondered, is this set before then, and that's how we ended up in those scenarios?
Yeah.
Or is this supposed to be current time and he's going to have to get some help? Similar to the way that Jin got some help to escape from the Imperials, from our rebel friends. Is Luthien going to be the one to save him?
Well, one part of me thinks that it would be a good way of showing how he ended up in the Empire. You can get sort of clemency on your sentence by agreeing to serve 2 years in the Imperial Army or something like that. But by the same token, we know that they've just massively increased fines, massively increased sentences, and they said, well, this would have been six months before, but now it's 6 years, sort of thing. So you see, I think it is now rather than then. But how much further down the line is it, sort of thing? Weirdly, that photograph you show there, them using what was basically a credit card machine that we used to use when I worked in the toy shop in the 80s. It was kind of funny. It was in Polaroids. Now we see that. There's lots of 80s sort of physical things turning up in this show. But where are we going to go next? I mean, I wonder, just a thought, whether if he's sentenced, will he be sentenced on the planet that he's on, the holiday planet? Will he be sent to Wabani, which is where Jin was sent at the start of Rogue One, a sort of a Labour planet, or another place? I don't know where this new planet is in the galaxy because they never really update the galaxy maps like they should, and I really wish they would because it drives me mad. I want to know where places are on the map. Next week, and I think next week's the start of another trilogy. Will be very interesting to see where we find Cassian. And like you say, are they going to leave him to rot? Are they going to spring him out? How's it going to play?
Yeah, and I think Tony Gilroy did say in an interview that this episode is kind of like a one that sits out on its own.
Yeah.
Sort of taking him from one storyline into the next, I guess. Which is interesting because they filmed quite a lot, or at least a lot of time was spent at Cleverley's, and we didn't really see too much of it compared to what we saw in set pictures in terms of the depth of what they created for those scenes. Didn't really see much of it, so I kind of thought that a little bit strange. I wondered if there was a few things cut from that. Which kind of brings me back to my point as to what were the rebels doing that caused the trouble, and that's what kind of made me think, were they stealing things from stalls or something like that, because we kind of saw a lot of stalls created in the set photos, and I wondered if there was just a scene cut just to simplify it a little bit. Yeah,
possibly. I mean, I can't fault the flow of the episode, other than the Cinta scene, which I do agree felt a little bit dropped in, but even then I could see the logic of the scene. It wasn't completely incongruous. It did make sense, but the pacing of the show so far, building up to stuff, slow, fast, everything else. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and we ended the episode again with another Cyril scene, really pushing the envelope in Cyril's storyline and really pushing it forward. Cyril sitting in a chair, looking at a computer screen, reads something that we can't read, and has some look of concern on it as what's happened. And so Cyril's slow burn continues. Will it have a payoff? I kind of hope, in a sick kind of way, that we get to the end of the series and just nothing's happened to him in his life.
Well, what I think's going to happen, Brian, here's my guess. I think Cyril will ultimately end up being the editor of the letters page of Return of the Jedi Weekly. That's where he will end up. That's my guess.
I'm going to say he's going to kill his mother.
Well, that's one extreme to the other. Yeah, let's go with that.
It's going to be one of the two or somewhere in between.
You smash the brains in with a bowl of Cocoa Pops. Why not?
Something like that's going to happen. He's going to flip. But I just don't know if you're in standards, you're checking standards on your computer screen, presumably. How does that connect him back into what's happening? Is he checking the appropriate jail terms being issued to people, and he's wondered, why is this guy being given 6 years for whatever? But how would he connect it to Cassian based on just text and not an
when
image?
he was talking to Flob, was it Flob?
Flob.
Yeah, when he was talking to Flob, what a great name. He kind of told him exactly everything he's been doing, and that guy, Flob, basically went, "Oh, let's ignore all that and get you into a position." You just got to wonder how much notice the guy took of that, or whether he was just dismissive and sort of flobbed him off, and just put him in the role, or could that play into something? I just think at some juncture it's going to be Dedra Miro that pulls him out of this irrelevancy that he's found himself in. She'll realise that he was onto something, like she's onto something, and Cyril will be part of that sort of bigger picture. And I think that may be how he gets pulled in. And, there could be a partnership there that could cause trouble for the good guys.
I noticed that Flob kind of indicated that he was going to delete elements from Cyril's kind of record, which kind of made me think of deleting planets from maps. Maybe there's a whole kind of dodgy little Imperial undercurrent going on here. Maybe people have been hiding the fact what the rebels have been stealing. Maybe there's a rebel in amongst the Imperial standards.
Don't you think, though, that we're at that sweet spot of the season where there's so many potential ideas and so many potential avenues for the storylines to go that we can really have some fun hypothesising what's coming up next week?
I think so. But I do think the best way to treat Cyril is to let him go the whole series and just have nothing happen to him, other than eat some chocolate Cocoa Pops and get slapped by his mother, and just be miserable the whole season, and just no payoff.
Final shot of season 1 post credits is him just sitting in that cubicle, just tapping away.
No. It's sitting eating his chocolate cocoa balls whilst his mother's just lying with just the blood coming out of her head on the floor.
Dark. You are dark.
Dark.
Yeah, dark.
That's
I love it.
That's the way he goes rebel. I want to know who Uncle Harlow is. Are we going to find out that Uncle Harlow is actually Palpatine's nickname?
Why not? It's as likely as anything else.
Yeah. There needs to be a payoff for Uncle Harlow. He's been name-checked too many times. Yeah.
You wonder whether he's sort of an underworld guy, whether he is just a bureaucrat who's just good at his job, just a hooked-up guy for in terms of like real-world work, or whether he's a gangster or what. We need to find out. Definitely need to find that out.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that is Cassian episode 7. Pretty much done, I think. Mark, thanks for joining me this week.
My pleasure.
Back on Sunday. It's going to be my birthday. There will be cake. I'll be joined by Carl Bayless for Sunday's show. We'll be recapping all the Star Wars news this week. Anything in Star Wars news this week so far caught your attention?
Oh, there's always loads going on, Fantha. We've wrapped up our New York Comic Con coverage, of which we had lots. Very pleased with what we got done there. And Phantom Tracks Radio is kicking up and going again. So we have a reaction chat, which we are recording tomorrow for this episode, where me and Mark will go really out into the weeds and come up with loads of nonsense that we've not thought of yet. And there's a couple more cannon fodders with some content from New York Comic Con. And hopefully this week we will have new episodes at least recorded of Fantha Down Under, Planet Leia, and Start Your Engines. And there's a collecting tracks in the can that just needs tidying up and posting, which should be out this Friday.
Yeah. Mr. Paul Naylor's got a nice report from Comic Con Scotland as well up on the site. Hugh McGregor was there. Made some interesting comments about the situation with Obi-Wan Kenobi and its future, and not had any conversations so far as to a second series, and that was a interesting comment, because it kind of felt like maybe they would have had that conversation before now.
Yeah, I think with that show, I think they're in a nice situation whereby Ewan wants to do it. It's taken forever to get to this point. You've still got 10 story years to play with, if you like, or really 10 real years until Ewan's the age, essentially, that Alec Guinness was when he did the film, which is scary because I'm the same age as Ewan, so I don't even want to think about that. But you know, it doesn't need to be what happened the next day. It can be what happened 5 years later. So there are rumours out there that they're looking at doing something with young Leia and some sort of series with her as well. So there's all sorts of hypotheses and ideas about that. So yeah, he's back in the world. He's back on the table. He's keen to do it. I think that's the big that's the main thing. But yeah, Paul and you know, the stuff in that article is well worth a read. It's a lovely article.
Yeah. On that note, let's call it a night, and we'll talk again soon.
We certainly will. Thanks for inviting me on. Always fun.
Right. Well, see you soon, guys. Thanks for joining us on the live chat as well.
Keep up to date with the latest Star Wars news each and every day on FanthaTracks.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Fantha Tracks. And be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and follow Fantha Tracks TV to be alerted to new content and to be a part of our live shows.